the workshop here. We got some prizes. Got 3 different questions. First question is, Pelican Island in Florida was the first national wildlife refuge. Can somebody name the second? That's correct. You can take this to the registration desk and you got a prize. Question number 2, which state has the most national wildlife refuges? Scott. That's correct. And the last question is, who wrote, if you travel much in the wilder sections of our country, sooner or later you're likely to meet the sign of the flying goose, the emblem of the National Wildlife Refuges? That's correct. You all right? Congratulations. Well, welcome again to our workshop entitled Challenges of Fire in the Urban Interface. Our facilitator today is Chris Wilcox. Chris is the National Fire Operations Fire Program leader for the service located at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho. Chris' duties include oversight, coordination, and direction of the services, wildland, fire preparedness, fuels, training, planning, fire safety, and health program areas. Prior to his current position, Chris served as a fire management officer for the Fish and Wildlife Service New Mexico Fire Program, assistant fire management officer and prescribed fire specialist at the Fish and Wildlife Service Fire Program in Arizona, and the superintendent of the Heber Interagency Hotshot Crew on the Apache Sitgraves National Forest. Chris earned his degree in biology from Northern Arizona University. Please help me welcome Chris Wilcox.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. First, let me say that I'm honored to be here speaking with you this week, recognizing the significance of this week and ultimately the culmination of what this week will bring in the many months leading up to this and the hard work from many folks. As Joe said, you are in Ballroom B. This is Challenges of Fire in the Urban Interface, so if that's not the workshop that you want to be in, I'll give you a minute to excuse yourself and then we'll keep going. We may embarrass you on the way out, but okay, well, what we brought together today for this panel is a panel of service fire management professionals, all with significant experience in managing wildland fire, both wildfire, which is the stuff that we do not light, as well as the management ignited or prescribed fire that we use as a management tool on many of our refuges. Much of this week is about taking an eyes-forward approach and identifying the challenges that we will face as we move into the next 10 to 15 years. This morning was an excellent setup for that, as well as the implementation strategies and tactics to fulfill the vision, mission, goals, and objectives of the service and the wildlife refuge system. The refuge system prides itself on its history, culture, and tradition of utilizing fire as a management tool to accomplish resource management objectives on our refuges. It has been used for several reasons. Our managers early on recognized that ecosystems and the habitats are not static, nor should we manage them as such. Many of our lands naturally occur within some sort of disturbance regime, whether that is through hydrological processes, through herbivory of the wildlife, or through natural processes such as fire. And with that, removal of those disturbance regimes, either through diversion dams, establishing reservoirs where we no longer can get that scouring effect and removal or change in vegetation, the removal or significant downswings of our climax herbivores, if you will, some of the large bison on the plains, as well as over-management on many of our lands through domestic livestock and overgrazing have all created challenges for us. Specific to today and the wildlife refuge system is another challenge that we face, which was the exclusion of fire in many of our fire-adapted ecosystems. And so again, within the Fish and Wildlife Service, our managers recognize that fire plays a crucial role in managing the habitats for biodiversity and creating that heterogeneity that we need for the habitats as well as the wildlife for which we have stewardship. Many of the flora and fauna under our charge have evolved in fire-adapted ecosystems. We recognized early on that if applied using sound science, fire is one of the most economical natural tools that we have to restore, enhance, and protect wildlife, their critical habitats, as well as the people and the properties within and adjacent to our lands, and at the landscape level we can accomplish those projects. We heard this morning Greg talk about the Urban Refuge Initiative. Our folks continue to sprawl into the wildlands, many of the areas that many of you as refuge managers or as biologists or as fire professionals or others have recognized, thinking back to the refuges that you worked on a decade ago where there was nothing around other than a gravel road, if that, to get out to your location, and now we're seeing homes and commercial properties and many, many other things that are fragmenting our lands that we need. And with the Urban Refuge Initiative, there are many goals associated with that. Again, selling our story, telling our story, allowing the next generation to understand where we're going and why we do what we do so they can appreciate it and they can continue to support what we need through their advocacy through their constituency, excuse me. There will be several things discussed on LAPS, the land acquisition prioritization system. And again, trying to combine those chunks of land, those tracts of lands into more of a contiguous chunk of land for our habitats. And again, that will continue to create more and more challenges from a management standpoint, from the ability to apply fire as a tool across the landscape as we have historically and has been so much a part of our culture and tradition to manage our habitats. So with a panel of experts, it's my pleasure to introduce the 4 subject matter experts that will be briefing you today. The first up is Lee Nelson. He is the Fire Management Officer for the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge located in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the metropolitan area. He is responsible for the oversight and complex prescribed fire and wildfire response program that includes 14 county wetland management districts and 37 cooperative agreements. Prior to his position in Minnesota, Lee was a fire management officer at Desert National Wildlife Refuge Complex in Las Vegas, Nevada. He began his fire career with the U.S. Forest Service on the Coconino National Forest in Flagstaff, Arizona in 1978. He has a Master of Science degree in resource analysis. Additionally, we have Carl Schwope. Carl is the Fire Management Officer for the Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge. He started his career with the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1995 at Balcones as a seasonal firefighter. He graduated from Texas State University in 1994 with a degree in wildlife biology. Additionally, we have Glen Stratton. Glen started his career with the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1985 on Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge in Central Florida as a tractor plow operator. In the mid-90s, Glen transferred to Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge on the Outer Banks of North Carolina as a fire control officer. He enjoyed all the Outer Banks had to offer until 2001 when he transferred back to Merritt Island as the District Fire Management Officer. Currently, Glen is a Regional Prescribed Fire Specialist for the Fish and Wildlife Service Southeast Region located in Atlanta, Georgia. And then finally, last but not least, Kip Morrill is the Assistant Fire Management Officer for the North Central Valley Management Zone, which is headquartered out of Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge Complex located 10 miles south of Willows, California. Kip has worked for the service for over 10 years supporting the North Central Valley Zone and the regional fire program with diverse skills and experience. Prior to coming to the service, Kip worked for the BLM Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, in various positions throughout California, Oregon, Utah, and South Carolina. He's been a strong representative for the Service Fire Program on the national and international fire assignments, and work details including Zone Fire Management Officer and Regional Fire Management Coordinator. He completed the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Federal Fire Management Program, including intensive courses in biological sciences and resource management. So with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker up, Mr. Lee Nelson, to provide us with some of his insight into some of the challenges and the successes in the wildland urban
Thanks,
interface.
Chris. You finished with this? Yeah, set it down there for me. Okay, I think what we've been through this morning already for most everybody's first day here is a vision for the next 10+ years to go on. I think the underlying theme that's been, will be reinforced the rest of the week too, is partnership, collaboration. So what I'm gonna talk about now, the underlying theme is collaboration from partners and cooperators. Forward. Where I'm from right now is Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, as Chris mentioned. It's Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. Let me get my, just have a, okay. If you can see right here, that's the refuge headquarters. There's Minneapolis International Airport, and right about here is the Mall of America. Chris mentioned I started my career at Mormon Lake, Arizona, which is on the Coconino National Forest back in 1978. Population there was 50. Year-round, 50 people. So from there, I ended up in Las Vegas, and the natural transition then would be continue on the urban interface. So I kind of missed winter, so why not go to Minnesota? So what we have here is 50 miles along Minnesota River. Fort Snelling, which you can see is at the junction of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers right there. That's why Minneapolis and St. Paul is there, the conjunction or confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. So the refuge runs along the Minnesota River about 100 miles from the confluence, either side, and again, they're trying to establish a contiguous landmass of whether it be county, state, federal land, so there's a corridor for wildlife. And as you mentioned too, if you read the draft next generation here at your leisure, the final will be out in October. Population trends and growths are going to be affecting us all. Just in the last 20 years, Minneapolis-St. Paul urban area has grown 16%. That will continue to grow. I think every burn program has, we have challenges. Smoke's always one of them. Coupled with urban interface, you're going to see smoke all the time as one, but there's things I'll address that we can do to mitigate smoke. Public perception acceptance is another one where if you put yourself in the public position, what you see on TV is what you perceive. And, it's always, the fires you see on TV are predominantly Southern California, the firestorm of the year. So that's what people perceive when they think of wildfire. And that's what chaparral, not every place has chaparral as a fuel type. So whatever your fuel type is at your refuge, it probably doesn't burn like chaparral, but that's the public perception. And we mentioned demographic changes too. That's just to be something to be aware of and expect. And the underlying success story here to mitigate things that I mentioned before is going to be collaboration and cooperation with partners. Just to mention again, why burn? Hazard fuel reduction is the primary reason we burn budgetarily. We all know that there's a lot of ecosystems out there vegetative-wise that are fire dependent. They need fire to exist to maintain themselves. It's a good tool for exotic species control, for cheatgrass, brome grass. buckthorn, for example. Some are chemical plus fire and then all fire later on, but you can use it as a tool. It's very cost effective. Smoke management. This is a page out of a burn plan that I have at Minnesota Valley. St. Olaf is a university in Northfield, Minnesota. If anybody ever watched the Golden Girls, one of them, St. Olaf, Minnesota. I never did see her there, though. But right here you can see the challenge of smoke management with smoke-sensitive receptors. When we're writing a burn plan, roads, homes, businesses are smoke-sensitive receptors. One right here, a hospital. I mean, you don't want to put smoke on a hospital. So when I'm looking at this, I'm going, where am I going to put the smoke? Predominant wind, Minnesota springtime, is northwest wind. This right here, you got a north arrow there, so north's at the top of the map. So a northwest wind isn't going to work. So what I did here was I created a non-smoke sensitive receptor. I went to the university. This is their easement. They own this, and we manage it for them. And it's kind of an outdoor classroom for them. So I went to the Board of Regents, got them involved, and say, can I put smoke on your campus for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours between noon and 5 o'clock any given day that I have the right wind vector and the right temperatures, the right humidities, those kind of things that are within prescription in the burn plan. They met, thought it over, and said, sure. That I created a non-smoke sensitive receptor from one that was. Here's a picture of that same campus from the burn plan map. Taken, there's the burn unit back here. And we caught a day where it's just perfect. Right down in here was the soccer practice fields. They were out practicing the day I lit this, never got any smoke on them. One of the reasons was we had a dispersion index, which is a combination of mixing height and transport winds that was perfect. I mean, the winds, eye level winds were at 4 to 5 miles per hour instead of 10 miles per hour. At 10, we would have shot smoke a quarter mile down before it would have lifted. So you can make adjustments there with weather to get better smoke dispersion, smoke lifting, smoke management. An excellent dispersion index does not necessarily mean it's a no problem smoke day. Like I mentioned, when you have eye level winds of 10 or 11 miles an hour, that's going to put smoke across the ground at a level before it starts rising a quarter mile down. So you might have smoke sensitive receptors getting a bullet of smoke on them. Then you got to look at your fuels too. Duration. Do you have a lot of heavy fuels out there that are going to smoke overnight, where you may have an inversion, or are they light fuels like grass or brush that will normally go out by themselves in an hour or two? So look at your smoke. You look at your fuels for your smoke duration. Smoke continued. Here is another waterfowl production area in an urban interface. And one question, where am I going to put the smoke? Can anybody see how I mitigated wind vectors here? It's this unit is 65 acres, excluding the water. So what I did here, I've been at Minnesota Valley about 6 years. Prior to me getting here, the last time this was burned was one unit. They did not realize that this subdivision up there had occurred. It just appeared overnight to them. So they litter off 65 acres. The fire chief shows up from Lakeville, structure fire chief. He was rather upset that these people out here on a nice spring day had their windows open and their clothes on the line. And all this smoke went and inundated that unknown smoke-sensitive receptor of a subdivision. So what I did to mitigate this was took the chief to lunch, good mitigation, and I divided it into 4 different units with 4 different wind vectors, east, west, west and southwest and south. So unit 1, for example, east wind puts it out over here. Again, the smaller units, you don't have the longer duration, actually less tons per acre of fuel, that means less smoke. What it does do, though, is anybody take a guess at this one waterfowl production area, how many burn days it's going to take me to achieve that? Well, we have 4 different units with 4 different wind vectors, except for these 2. I might be able to combine them on a west. So at least 3 days, if not 4, different weather days that it's gonna take me to achieve this. So for smoke management, it's intensive and it's time consuming. Remember Smokey Bear? So does the public. You know, for, let's see, next month, August, Smokey, I believe, is gonna be 62 years old. 94 was 50. So Smokey's been around for a long time with the message of only you can prevent forest fires. That's what people remember. The message is gradually changing. It's now wildland fires prevent, and most wildfires are preventable, which is a good message. But what people see in their backyards when you're doing prescribed fire is Smokey's message and their perception of what they see on TV, which is Southern California, SoCal. You know, they're seeing that firestorm in that fuel type burning down houses. So that's what their perception is. All fire is bad, and we're gonna burn up like California. So what you need to do is educate, educate, educate. And when you're doing that, it helps, I think, to tell people about fire-dependent ecosystems, whether it's lodgepole pine, ponderosa pine, even the Southern California fuel types that are fire-dependent, tall grass prairie, northern tall grass prairie, fire-dependent. Let them know that fire is part of the ecosystem, just like wind, snow, weather, rain, all that's part of the ecosystem. So is fire. It just doesn't occur in, like weather every day. Some regimes are 5 years, some are 10, some are 100. But like a ponderosa pine forest, every 25 years you'd have a fire go through there, otherwise it's gonna get a degraded habitat. Or a lodgepole pine with the Stratton cones. Without fire, it can't reseed itself. What I do too is, I use these brochures. I mean, it's not social networking, but I know my demographics. Some are, some aren't. So I can't just abandon these old style brochures. I put them in not mailboxes, but I use them as drop boxes to educate the public that are around my burn units prior to the burn. And they do read them. I go out and talk to people after the burn, do a survey, and they started trying to educate me about, that's a fire-dependent ecosystem, so I know they read these brochures. Other places I try public education is Audubon bird clubs. And these people are part of your neighbors, they're a part of the community. So if you can educate a few people like this, you're gonna have more people in the community saying, I know about this. So I do bird clubs, master naturalist meetings, I go to them and talk about fire dependency and prescribed fire and fire in the ecosystem. And I use local fire departments too, on scene. They're cooperators, and cooperators are a member of the community. So public perception does change when you have the local fire department on scene, like a water tender. It's a pricey piece of equipment. You work with a cooperator and they ask, what do you need? Bring your water tender over, and if you have any brush trucks or UTVs, utility terrain vehicles that have a tank on the back that they might use for initial attack, wildland brush fires, bring it along and bring your PPE, personal protective equipment, and I'll put you on the fire line with a single resource boss. And here they are with communication. They got a single resource boss. They're on a project, prescribed fire, and they're out there almost hands-on. And what I tell them is, prescribed fire is wildland fire backwards. What we're doing is lighting it and putting it out as we go, so they see fire behavior. And I said, when you respond to a wildland fire, you'll take that experience and go, okay, we need to put some black in place, so they have some experience, at least with, if not hands-on, it's at least observation. So the two I use the most for public perceptions, cooperative agreements, and collaborative efforts, because those people are part of the community. As long as you follow it up with face-to-face. Other efforts I do is FEMA. Everybody's heard of FEMA. They're putting together now with structured teams. Depending on the state population, there may be 8 to 10 to 20 FEMA Type 3 teams. Kind of like NWC fire teams, the Type 3 IC teams. except for their FEMA to do all, what they call is all, I'm gonna get confused now, because NWCG is all risk, FEMA is all hazard. That's the difference there. So they put these teams together, and because the fire service, be it Department of Interior or Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, has been using incident command system since the early 80s. So we have 20 years of experience with incident command system. Some of these structure departments only just started it. So you can take your expertise, if you will, or your experience, and get them started with incident command system in their FEMA setup team. They're set up just like NWCG teams. That's a start too for some of the, get your foot in the door with your partners. Annual refresher, RT 130 is mandatory for your red card for your firefighter type 2s and everyone. I have about 80 people attending. I don't advertise, they just know that I'm putting it on in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Every year, 80 people show up, 6 to 8 different agencies, including Bureau of Indian Affairs. Their highest, Mendawakut and Shakopee Sioux community has, I think 20 some red carded, but the highest one is firefighter type 1, so they really can't even put their own refresher on, so they come to me. And in return, in the fall, if I have a fall prescribed fire season, those guys are available, they want the experience, they'll show up to help me. I won't put them on the burn plan, but they're there as extra resources at no charge. That's collaborative effort. Here's an example of it's an educational tool, but at the same time it's a notification that I put out for one of the maps we looked at before, that Soberg waterfowl production area. I put it out weeks ahead of time, and it's kind of generic, but at the same time it's educational. And you notice it's not highlighted when I put these out, but I highlighted in cooperation with Lakeville Fire Department. Their local fire department shows up on scene. They don't have anything to say to me. I've never gotten a phone call from, I'll put my number at the bottom here. I've never gotten a phone call since I've added Lakeville Fire Department. Okay, those guys are gonna be here, they know what they're doing, everybody's happy. So the Lakeville chief, the last time we burned this, he brought his own videographer with him, and he had on cable network, he had the Chief's Corner. It ran for about a month, every other day or something. So he put this 15-minute video together and spun it for his own department about he's collaborating with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reduce hazardous fuels in these people's backyard. It worked for him, so it's working for me. When I first got to Minnesota Valley almost 6 years ago, the challenge there, I was told, was staffing, trying to find people that were interested in working in an urban refuge and wildland fire. Where was I going to get them from? Seasonal employees, administratively directed or casual hire employees, ADs. They couldn't find any. Where did I get them? I have a staff of ADs now. Every year, most of them are returning. There's a core of 10 to 15. I get them from structure fire departments. Those guys are already trained in fire. They only work 10 days a month. What are they going to do the rest of the time? They're interested in fire. You get one guy there, and he goes, man, this is fun. We get paid to light stuff on fire. He'll recruit for you. More burn units than acceptable burn days. I think everybody has that problem where, with your weather parameters that have to match your burn plan and all the units you have to burn, you don't, depending on the year, you don't get that many days for really good burn days. So prioritization needs to be taking place at your refuge level too with your biologists and refuge managers to make sure you prioritize those units that need it. Again, my casual hires, my collateral duty staff, local fire department recruitment is where I'm getting most of them from now. Since I started doing those refreshers, in 5 years, people know I'm there. The word of mouth gets around, just like when I'm educating the bird club people, the master naturalists, there's people in the community now that know I'm there, know what I do, and word of mouth by education is going, hey, you want to burn? This guy might hire you as an AD. So it gets around. Other burn involvement that we have here to supplement, when I mentioned more burn days, more burn units than acceptable burn days, if you get enough people, especially if a module can come in, you got one good burn day, you might get 2 units done. especially if you have a refuge like mine that's spread out where the wind vectors are all different for each unit instead of a big square refuge where, hey, northwest wind, we can burn 17 units today. But at the same time, if you have more than one burn crew burning that day, you're gonna get twice as much done. So the zone FMO has been pretty good about coordinating with other regions, other agencies. For example, National Park Service, we have fire use modules from Black Hills, which is South Dakota, Buffalo River, which is Arkansas, Fish and Wildlife Service, Sheldon Hart, which is Oregon, come to Minnesota. We trade. Klamath Basin, Balcones in Texas. BIA, I use men to walk in the Shakopee Sioux community, they're neighbors. They get training, they help me. And usually the best part is base salary's covered. So in the same time, usually we aren't burning the same times a year. You know, as spring moves north, we'll trade with other zones, Fish and Wildlife Service. Iowa starts burning before we do. We'll switch back and forth and trade personnel. Be a little creative. Doesn't take much. Developing partnerships. Like I said, you need to work with the zone FMO and interregional and interagency partners, but take a chief to lunch. That's what they like to do. Sit down and get a face-to-face with them. Tell them about the training opportunity I mentioned before where wildland fire, or prescribed fires wildland backwards. County chiefs meetings, next slide I'll show you is what I take to county chiefs meetings. Rural fire assistance, when it's funded, is a good tool. Reimbursable cooperative agreements with smaller volunteer fire departments. Sometimes you can get a reimbursable where they'll put your wildland fire out if you're so far away on initial attack response or short-staffed. They'll take it for you and they get reimbursed. VFDs, volunteers, they could use the funding to put back in their program. National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, National Fire Prevention Association right here. Crosswalk training. The structure guys get a shortcut and most of it's online. Look it up, just on crosswalk training, NWCG, you can read about it. All hazard agreements. I use that with structure departments. I have special equipment like this Marshmaster. It's a swamp buggy, if you want to call it that, in the Minnesota River Basin, Mississippi River Basin, lots of cattail swamps, marshes. That's where this is used for us, but if they have a search rescue, for example, they don't have that kind of equipment. So I do an all hazard agreement. They can call me up. I'm responsible for my equipment. They're responsible for theirs. We just have an agreement, non-monetary, easy to write up. We're working together already. I have something they can use. They see the value in me and I see the value in them. Fire threat fires, reporting. When I worked at Desert National Wildlife Refuge, I got hired as the FMO there around 2001. The regional fire coordinator called me up 6 months later, Lee, before you got here, we hardly had any wildland fires. What's going on? You show up and we get all these fires. I started working with Las Vegas Hell Attack. Say, hey, I got a fire number for you guys when you're done on your normal recon. Could you recon the sheep range up on Desert Refuge? Sure. Well, there's stuff burning up there. Nobody ever saw it. So they get the reports. I do a fire report. My stats go up. It shows justification for fire program. And I mentioned FaceTime is important with those cooperators and chiefs, et cetera. The piece of paper is great, but having the face-to-face with them once a year is priceless. Here's what I take to chiefs meetings. I try to get on their agenda just for 10 minutes, I tell them, in the wintertime, January, February. Those monthly chiefs meetings is the best time for me to go. In Minnesota, where I'm at, every 3-4 years you might have a spring wildland fire season. So I remind them that between me and the DNR, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, we have a dispatch center that we can provide aircraft. When you're doing structure fire, the last thing you usually think about is aircraft. But when structure fire responds to wildland fire, I remind the chiefs, hey, we have this stuff available. All you have to do is make a phone call. So it's one more tool that we can use to share with them. And at the same time, I'm finding out now that I'm having more fires that are threat fires to the refuge because they're responding to wildland fires, giving me a call or an email and saying, hey, Lee, we put out this abandoned campfire near your refuge just on this day. Here's where it was. Do you want to know that? It went every time. Annual operating plan. Put this together with, in 2007, with Minnesota DNR and Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge, which is just north of me. And this runs the metro area wide, about, I want to say, 8 counties in the metro area. It makes dispatching easier for us. We don't have to go through Minnesota Interagency Fire Center, which is Grand Rapids, way northern Minnesota, to get dispatched. We just go through Cambridge, get dispatched. It's easy. Oh, plus I found out that there's these smoke chasers is what the ADs are called for DNR. They don't have any experience. I don't put them on my burn plan, but they'll send an engine plus some of these smoke chasers, plus a guy that's firefighter 1 or better, just to accompany me on prescribed fires. Here's an extra set of people I can use. They're not minimum on the burn plan. I don't put them on there, but they're there. They're full PPE, and they're there to learn. Plus, they're there extra water. They got 300 more gallons I don't have to go find. Those kind of things. Here's another issue that I'm addressing here with growth challenges. This is a burn unit, or was. There's places to put the smoke. It can go over here to the west, but if you look at these roads right here, and maybe 10 years ago we could have burned this, but now smoke won't affect these roads, but the problem is the flame lengths when people are driving by, it's gonna be spectacular, and they're gonna wanna stop, and they're gonna wanna take pictures, and you know, most people would pull over to the side of the road, but driving here today, I noticed that some people didn't. They have their GPS unit in the middle of the road waiting for it to come up before they can drive. So I was concerned that we may have fatalities or injuries or car wrecks just from the visual part of the prescribed burn. Brought that to management's attention and suggested that Florida 2 years ago had a fatality where someone stopped on the road, take a picture, and got ran down. So I said, you know, these are potentially ideas that we need to look at and use alternative methods, be it chemical, mechanical, or we'll have Kip talk about it later. WUI comes with a whole different set of, let's call it situational awareness. SA is what the fire world calls it, situational awareness. And in the WUI, you just have to identify some that you don't see every day when you're in Mormon Lake District, population 50 people. What you're looking at here is lots of traffic, especially in the AM and PM. Public scrutiny, you're burning in people's backyards. Air quality alerts for metro areas. Use of a PIO in some places where normally you wouldn't have, but a parking lot where you're gonna put a burn plant or burn together, people are showing up there thinking that this is where they always hike, 100 vehicles a day, put a PIO there. Clear the units. Right here, people see that sign, that doesn't mean anything to them, that must be for somebody else. Put this down in that slide there. This is a burn I do when it's flooded. People can't get to that unit because they have to swim. So I canoe out to it and burn it. It's easy holding, plus the public can't access it unless they boat out there. Budget challenge, there's one that I just put this together so you could get a background on the budget. I'll run through it real quick. Department of Interior adopted a hazardous fuel allocation process in 2007. The hazardous fuel prioritization and allocation system is used each year to make hazardous fuels reduction agency allocations. That's called HIFPAS. It employs the use of a modeling tool called Ecosystem Management Decision Report Support, or EMDS. And the EMDS tool provides a common approach that all agencies use to direct funds to those areas of the country that have a higher risk of wildland fire. What does that mean? Some places have more hazardous fuel than others. So looking towards the future, we've heard the term adaptive management. When you look at your draft copy, the final's coming out in October, see adaptive management, and why don't you think about putting adaptive budget management in that phrase and think about that. That's my mitigation for this one, is something to think about. We're gonna have to get creative with budgets. And Kip, I think you took the summary out because we're gonna summarize at the end. And questions at the end also. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge. It's a pretty complex program down there. Like Chris was saying, I got 26 years in with Fish and Wildlife, and I think all 26 of them was put in the last 9 at Merritt Island. So this is Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge. It's located on the east coast of Central Florida, and it's an overlay of the Kennedy Space Center. Actually, that's I don't think we'll be seeing any more shuttle launches go off. I think they put the last one up last week. Merritt Island is an overlay refuge, meaning that the Kennedy Space Center owns the land, and Merritt Island is an overlay of that. It's about 141,000 acres. Those numbers may have changed. But in that, we also have 60,000 acres of Canaveral National Seashore. They're also an overlay of NASA and this area. Right, find my pointer here. Blind somebody. That area right there has all three. It has the refuge, the Park Service, and the Kennedy Space Center. And then down off the Cape of Florida, we have Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. That brings a whole nother set of challenges to the program. The population in Florida is growing. It was growing pretty rapidly back in the early 2000s, but I think that's kind of slowed down now. But they're still projecting, by the year 2015, there'll be a little over 3 million people in the greater Orlando area, Central Florida area. Some of the visitor services that we have there at Merritt Island. This is just a quick pie chart of some of the activities that go on the refuge. A lot of visitors are visiting that refuge, Big Burden Refuge. For the fire program, a lot of intergovernmental coordination. We have the Cape Canaveral Seashore. We have the Kennedy Space Center. A lot of state and federal partners with us right there. We also have Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. We have the Port Canaveral, which is one of the busiest, if not the busiest, ports on the east coast of Florida, and a lot of human development. And then other issues with the Fish and Game, the South Florida Water Management, just a whole host of other agencies that the program has to deal with. So prescribed burning. The refuge burns about 15 to 20,000 acres a year. Average size anywhere from 10 to 2,400 acres. Or they range in size from 10 to 2,400 acres. I'd say average size burn unit is probably about 800 acres there. Many restrictions. We got narrow burn windows. We have to worry about space flight operations, and not necessarily the aircraft itself or the spacecraft itself, but the payload. The payload is a big issue. The processing of the payloads. We have nesting season, and then the two main objectives are fuels management and habitat management. I'll just talk for just a second about this photo here. This was, I can't remember the year that we burned this, but it's about a 900-acre scrub unit. And you can see right to the west of the unit there, it's a lot of houses, a lot of urban development. Well, this unit happens to be in one of the primary scrub jay areas. That's the area that we're trying to restore back to scrub jay habitat. And as you can see by the photo, it's burning pretty good. As a fire manager, as the burn boss, everything was looking good. The smoke's going the right way. Burn's almost wrapped up, and then we have a biologist there on Merritt Island. He likes to think outside the box a little bit, and that's a good thing. And so he comes up to me right before we finish. He says, "Glenn, I'd like to cut out this piece right here." I said, "I'd like to cut all that out to leave some nesting for the scrub jays." I said, "Well, I'm glad you let me know that right at the beginning of the burn, so we could prepare for it. So we did, we accommodated him. We took tractor plows in there and put a couple plow lines and cut it out. Point being is that the fire manager needs to also be able to think outside the box and work with that biologist. We got some unusual constraints there. We got, safety, obviously, a lot of hazards around NASA. This photo in the bottom, it may be kind of hard to see, but that's that area right there and over here is where they keep all the ordnance to blow the solid rocket boosters off the side of the space shuttle, and it blows the explosive bolts that bolt the space shuttle to the pad. That's where they keep all that stuff. Prescription parameters, you can imagine the parameters that we have to have as far as, mainly for smoke management. Urban interface, you can see all the urban interface that is around the refuge. And then smoke management, other related issues is launches and landings, sensitive payloads, and they have about 15,000 people that work on the Space Center that shift change every day at 7 and 3:30. Resource management. The burning supports other programs. Marsh management, we're burning mainly for brush encroachment. Scrub management, restoration of overgrown scrub, and then timber management, stand replacement. But I would like to just mention this photo here. Is one thing that I'm trying to do, and is trying to change the mindset of these young firefighters that are coming on board. You put a drip torch in these guys' hands and they lose their mind. Everything's got to be black, and trying to get away from that and letting them know that, hey, it's all right if we leave a little green out there. So, and y'all can help with that too. The fuels management program, most of the vegetation types there at Merritt Island are all fire maintained. A lot of fire suppression during the 60s and 70s, which resulted in excessive fuel loads. As a result, we had 2 fatalities there in the early 80s, and there's still large areas of hazardous fuels. It's rapid growth. It never stops growing in Florida, and the restrictions on the burn windows. So how does all this work? You got to involve your partners. And when I say partners, it's not just the external partners. It's all the internal. The biologists, the public use folks, the managers, everybody, even the maintenance guys. It's everybody has to have buy-in to it, and get them involved from the start. When you're sitting down, when your FMOs come in to sit down, have the whole staff sit down and set your priorities and talk about what you want to do and how you want it to look. Have face-to-face meetings with your partners. As Lee mentioned, a luncheon isn't a bad idea. Airboat rides, they're good too. Building your relationships, that's what it's all about, is building our relationships. Own your program, good and bad. If you make a mistake, own it. For instance, we was doing a simple little marsh burn one day, but this marsh or a little impoundment, a couple 100 acres, but it happened to have the landing lights for the space shuttle in that impoundment. So the burn went good, everything was fine. I landed and driving on the way out to the burn unit, and I hear on the radio, hey, the boardwalk's on fire. I'm like, well, that ain't good. So I called dispatch. I get out there, and sure enough, the end of the boardwalk's burning up, and there's sirens going off, and I called dispatch. I said, hey, get on the horn to NASA and tell them we just burned up the PAPI lights. She said they already know. So there were more suits out there in the middle of that marsh in 20 minutes than I thought they could be there. But the fact is, I owned it. I said, hey, we did it, and we'll make it right. We can't fix the electrical part of it, but we'll put you a new boardwalk out there. And so we moved on from that. And just always be forthcoming with your program. And then there's your standard helicopter at sunset with the smoke picture. I'll just go ahead and set the record straight with those snags that are standing there. When I started back at Merritt Island in '01, my boss told me, he said, "Glenn, I want some burning going on in this place, and we're not in the pine tree growing business." So there you go. That's all. Go to the next.
Good afternoon. As stated, I'm Carl Swope, FMO at Balcones Canyonlands, and I think when Chris asked me to do this, I said yes and knew it'd be kind of nerve-wracking standing up talking in front of everybody, but I think sitting up there in those chairs under that spotlight for an hour, I was kind of happy to get up here and start talking. So I wanted to talk a little about taking this wildland urban interface and integrating it into habitat management, and how to take this, the idea of how we're going to defend the wildland urban interface and hazard fuel reduction strategies, and concept of putting in fuel breaks and defensible space and outreach is all part of it, but how to take it one step further and integrate our habitat management program. And I'll have to tell a little story here, kind of set the stage. About 5 weeks ago, I think it was June 5th, in a little community, Nutrioso, Arizona. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're standing looking at a map on the hood of a truck using headlights because the smoke column from the wallow fire blocking out the sun, having to keep wiping embers off of our map to keep it from burning up. And that's not an uncommon thing to look at maps when you're planning on what to do on fires. But the difference here is this map was a hazard fuel reduction map. It was where the forest had done fuels treatments for that community. And that's a new concept for us. It's now the first question we ask is we need maps with all your fuels treatments on them. Because, maybe this year's just a year, but fires seem to be getting bigger and more complex. And fuels treatments help. If you look on the map of the wallow fire and the outline of that map, in the northeast corner, which is ahead of the fire, you'll see a big horseshoe which goes around the community of Nutrioso, and those hazard fuels treatments were a big part of that. Skip forward a few weeks, northwest New Mexico, spent a couple of days north rim of the Via Caldera, working with members of the Tribal Council of the Santa Clara, both the governor, some of their resource advisors, flying on the north rim just across as the headwaters of the Santa Clara River. And that's land, part of the Santa Clara Indian Reservation. And members of that Tribal Council, they spent a lot of time looking at their land and listening to their concerns. The importance that watershed is to them, not just from their cultural values, but also from the habitat, all the work they did to restore the headwaters for the Rio Grande cutthroat, listening to all their concerns. But the problem with that is on the southeast of there, about 15, 20 miles, is a town of Los Alamos and the National Laboratory. And fire's fixing to come at that facility on 3 different sides. And so when we're back at camp, it's how do you manage your people, how do you manage your time? But the comment I had is, after looking at everything around Los Alamos and the laboratory and after what they've done after the Sierra Grande fire, it's all fuels treatments. All of the critical roads in the critical areas had fuels treatments. It made work and protection around the laboratory easy, a lot easier compared to when Sierra Grande went through. So I said we need to put all our resources to defend this watershed for these folks. But without a fuels treatment and without something to work off of, by that afternoon, 16,000 acres of that watershed burned. And I know driving back to camp that evening, you see the smoke column coming up, and a lot of people pulled over taking pictures because it's impressive to see that much land burn in one day. But after flying it and listening to the members of the tribal council and spending 2 days with them and their concerns, I couldn't even look at it because what devastation's fixing to happen there, what's going on. And so that's where kind of this presentation kind of ties some of this together is, how can we, do what we need to do, but on a larger area, we have to manage the landscapes, manage the watersheds, take it a little step farther than just defensible space around some homes. So I'll talk a little bit about the refuge and to give an introduction there. The refuge, Balcones Canyonlands, is basically established for these two birds, golden cheek warblers on the top and black-cap vireo on the bottom. And I got them stacked like that for a reason. Golden cheek warbler lives in closed canopy woodlands, mature trees. The habitat they live in is mature closed canopy hardwood and juniper woodlands. Whereas the black-cap vireo, they live in shrub, scrub brush, nest 3 to 5 feet off the ground. So if you can make that visual reference, the golden cheek warbler lives on the top of the trees and the vireo lives on the bottom. And complete different habitat types. To manage low scrub brush is easy, you burn it. But to manage for a closed canopy woodland, it takes a little different strategy. This is what golden cheek warbler habitat looks like, mostly in the canyons, on the ridges, and you can see mature trees. Now the problem with that is that that's good looking habitat, but it's Photoshopped. This is what it looks like when it's not Photoshopped, is we have, and this is what goes on with a lot of the refuges, the urban refuges these days. So how do we manage for this? And it's not that, homes are the problem or a problem. It's just something else we need to manage for. So when you look at everything that comes into play, we have to take everything into consideration. We can't, over prioritize one or the other. I fully believe that if we look at everything that's out there, we can come up with a solution that we can come up with a piece of work that would take care of and mitigate all of our values. So kind of what I'll show you here is a project and just kind of of something that we do to take a look at everything and to kind of get the thought process that I think we can take the hazard fuel reduction, defending the wildland urban interface, take it into our habitat management program and make it all work together. So to start with, we take a piece of what I call juniper infested hillside, and we take what is habitat in there, what is core habitat, what does the wildlife need, and then we can start working around that, what fuels we can take out. So we can go in there and mechanical treatments, and then follow it up with prescribed burn. And what you can see left is the areas that are still habitat. Just working. We can save, protect the habitat, both up the center in the valley and in the foreground. You see what would be golden cheek warbler, potential golden cheek warbler habitat. The rest we can take the fuel out of there, turn it back into grass. But that still leaves us with two things. One, it leaves us with the edge of the woodlands. As grass fire moves through the edge of the woodlands, we still have a problem there and the interior part of it. So what do we do for the edge of the woodlands is what we call shaded fuel break. You can see up in the top corner you have a grassland and you have a woodland. As fire moves towards the grassland, you're going to have ladder fuels. That's where the sunlight reaches the trees. They put limbs all the way to the ground without some sort of continuous fire burning into that woodland. Keeping a natural ladder, we'll have to mechanically do that. Being habitat, we'll have to, study, make sure we don't impact the endangered species. We do that in 3 different zones. You can see here, each zone, we determine if we just go in and remove the ladder fuels out for 30 meters in, it opens it up to a lot of different things. More humidity goes in there, the temperature rises, there's all sorts of different variabilities that's being studied. So we take it in zones. Each zone, the first zone is the blue zone. We call it zone 1. First 5 meters, and then it steps down as you get farther in. What that looks like from the ground, as you can see, shaded fuel break going in. This part here is treated. This is untreated. You can see ladder fuels all the way to the ground, burns through the grass. Ladder fuels is what gives the fire the opportunity to move up into the canopy and produce a type of catastrophic fires that would take a canopy, closed canopy woodland that bird needs and destroy that habitat. You can see here in the foreground, once those ladder fuels are moved, the hope is that the grass fire moves, hits the ladder fuels, and breaks that transfer to the canopy. What does it look like in a different view? You can see on the left, grassland moves into the woodlands. And then we take it interior a little farther, because as you get into these woodlands, the deeper, darker they are, the better habitat is, but they're also shaded. So we can turn these woodlands into being a fire break itself if we can just treat the edge of it. And that takes care of most of it, but now we got to talk about the inside, the interior of the woodlands. We don't want to just treat the edge. We got to look at everything. So this is where we're going to have to take our habitat management program and our hazard fuels program and incorporate it into the habitat management program. So these oak juniper woodlands that the golden cheek warbler lives in, these are some of the things we're going to try and do. It's just an overview, but promote diversity of the hardwoods. Hardwoods is the lacking in that. You know, we have deer browse, we have disease. They're short-lived trees to begin with. So a lot of these things are just, you know, make the hardwoods the limiting factor in the population. We also need to reduce competition within the stand. You know, we're taking land that hasn't been in refuge for very long. 1992 is when this refuge was first started, so there's a lot of previous land usage driving what the habitat management looks like. At the same time, we got to retain and promote mature junipers, and the reason that's important is juniper's a very fire intolerant tree. Probably the only places it really existed historically are very sheltered from fire. But without fire, they're now in a lot of different places. And we need to reduce the negative effects from high severity fires. Canopy fire in a ecosystem that you have endangered species that's dependent on that close canopy, any high intensity, high severity fire would have long lasting negative impacts, maybe 60, 80, or 100 years to restore some of that habitat. So to do any of this work, we have to first do some studies. So what we did is we looked at some of the places on the refuge that have had fire in the hardwoods, fire in the canyons, and went in and cooperated with the University of Texas to do some of the research for us and get some of our baseline data. These are some of the charts that can show what that data is, and I'll have to put a plug in here too, is if you're interested more on the data, come to the poster session tomorrow night and I'll have a poster on this. Well, basically it says that everywhere we saw fire in these woodlands, we see an increase in hardwood sprouting, we see an increase in hardwood generation, we see a decrease in some of the smaller juniper, not necessarily the larger juniper. So it looks like we can incorporate, you know, fire into management. So we look at our habitat, we look at it in two different places. We look at basically hardwood dominated woodlands, and we broke into two types, and that's with an understory less than 4 feet and an understory greater than 4 feet. And I'll show you some slides here to determine what that means. This would be an understory less than 4 feet. It's pretty much non-existent, or you may have some small juniper trees or other hardwood trees. And these are areas we can put fire into, an understory burn, a low intensity fire, reduce that competition, stimulate the hardwoods, but basically never get it to a hazard fuels problem. And this kind of takes us to where I'm going with the other side is the type 2 treatment areas is the understory greater than 4 feet. And I'll run through some slides here. This is what happens you know, with lack of fire, is the woodlands become dense. You get a lot of high density, small diameter trees, and these situations here is what becomes flammable. If you back off, it's the same overstory, you have the same closed canopy overstory, but the high density, small diameter trees is what creates our fuels problem, our fire problem. The ladder fuels are there. You get fire started inside this woodland. It can ladder not just from the edge, but also from the interior. And the other part of it is if we don't do anything, what you see over and over again is I have a picture here of one of the hardwood tree snags there in the center. When it dies for whatever reason, they're short-lived trees, they're prone to disease, they just die. What replaces that canopy space? And without a reduction of the competition of all these sapling junipers, that the whole woodland starts to slowly transition into a monoculture of juniper, which back from the beginning, the golden cheek warbler requires both the hardwood and the juniper. So if it was just a juniper woodland, then the species wouldn't exist. So once again, we have to get some more research. What we did in these type 2 areas is we've gone in and you can see basically on this graph, the black is juniper trees. And this is what forms most of the hazard fuel, the high density, small diameter. The color, the red, the yellow, the blue, the green, those are hardwood trees of various species. And you can see that the mature trees on the right-hand side, it's a decent mix, near 50-50 mix. That would be optimum golden cheek warbler habitat. But the recruitment class, which is the 3 columns on the left-hand side, you can see that all the new recruitment coming in. And this is, all of this would be basically a 1 acre. There was 10 plots at a 1/10 acre each. So that would total 1 acre, and you can see the stem count here, multi-thousand stem per acre, up to 4,000 to 5,000 stems per acre of juniper, which is the recruitment class. So part of the hazard fuel reduction program, and the next step where we're going is to basically remove that recruitment class of ash juniper, and that would be mechanical. And we're targeting basically this column down, which is 4-inch diameter and less. We'll go into thin it with the mechanical, take the small stuff out, and then do the understory prescribed burns. And then what we're looking at is basically taking all 3 of those treatment types from the remove the hazard fuels from the non-existent habitat, treat the edge, and then treat the interior, and apply that you know, where the wildland urban interface and where our endangered species habitat are all joined up right next to each other. And with that, we're thinking that we could possibly, you know, take this hazard fuel reduction program, integrate it with habitat management, and then come out with a product that is beneficial for multi-value. With that, I'll answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name's Kip Morrill, and I'm going to talk to you guys about a little something different. Just another tool in the toolbox when it comes to hazardous fuel reduction. And so, just a show of hands, how many of you guys have a toolbox at home? Everybody? Yeah, that's what I thought. How many of you have one tool in that toolbox? A hammer or a wrench or something like that? Me too. But anyways, the idea is you got to have more than one tool in your toolbox. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Eating away at the problem. What do you guys think that might be? Goats. That's what we're talking. Goats are something that obviously eats away at our WUI problem, and it is another tool in the toolbox. First of all, whoops. So this is where we've actually utilized our goats up here in the North Central Valley zone of the Great Central Valley of California. That's where we're located at the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge, and we've actually utilized our goats up in the Sacramento River National Wildlife Refuge, and then also down at Stone Lakes, which is a very urban area. Wildland urban interface, is it a person, place, or a thing? I think it's a combination of all those things. And that actually gives a pretty good overview right there. Let's see, how do I do this light? This guy right here. Oh, thank you. You can see this right here, that's Interstate 5. And that's a lot of our urban interface that we deal with down at the Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. This is a conservation easement. And so you can see that doing prescribed fire out there, although it's not something that's completely out of the picture, can be really challenging when you have an interstate highway and homes right there. To burn or not to burn? Answer is flexible alternatives. Basically what we did when we started looking at the goats as a means of treatment down at our Stone Lakes Refuge, we went to the Homeowners Association, talked to those folks, kind of explained to them, you know, we're looking at this goat alternative. However, what we're not saying is that the burning is always going to be something that we don't want to do. It's another tool in our toolbox. So we basically wanted to get the point across to the homeowners that burning isn't bad, it's just different. Are goats the only answer in the WUI? Absolutely not. Like I said, we've actually utilized our goat treatments, and we followed up with mechanical treatments. We followed up with mechanical treatment after the goats, and we've actually kind of gotten into a 3 to 5 year plan on some of our river refuges where we have the riparian habitat, We've actually gone in and after a 5-year plan of treatment of both goats for the first couple of years, followed up by mechanical and followed up with fire. So it's just another part of that tool. Do we become goat herders? That's a good question. We start looking at the cost of putting goats out on the landscape. We've actually been asked that question. Why don't we just buy our own goats? Well, you got to have a goat herder. You've got to have the dogs. You got to feed those goats when they're not doing their work for you. So what we found is that it's actually been a very cost-effective and a very useful tool to go ahead and employ these contracts, working with our contracting and agreements folks, and then also working with the refuge managers and coming up with the plan for that. Some other things on the menu, public information. That's always a huge key for when we're implementing our GOAT program or we're actually putting fire on the ground. Talking with our partners, talking with the public, engaging the public, making sure that they're all part of that process has proven very valuable to us. And then also working with our different cooperators. That's a picture of our Smokey the Bear and our hazardous fuel area signs that we put together down at the Stone Lakes Refuge, where we've employed the goats. So that's worked out well for us. I'm just kind of bumping through because I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. That was about as brief as you could get, but that's what I got.
Thank you. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes for questions, if you'd like to ask any questions of the panel. And if you do, please, Joe will bring around a microphone so we can get that captured and everyone can hear. Catherine.
I was wondering if Carl could talk a little bit about some of the Firewise work you've done with the communities nearby, Balcones.
A couple of communities that I'll talk about, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is a prescribed fire where you put smoke in the wrong place is a good way to start some relationships. And when you work with the communities, it all starts with conversation. And then, so the one community I'll talk about is Whitewater Springs. About 6 years ago, we did a prescribed burn right adjacent to that. Honestly, didn't do a very good job working with the community as far as notification and outreach pre-burn. Afterwards, we did a lot and started building that relationship. Defensible space was one of the first things we did, and that is set up, just go in there and work with a couple of the homes that were probably had the most concern, but yet were still defensible with a little bit of work. Set those up as demonstration areas, because what is defensible space? What does it look like? It's a lot easier to show somebody and tell somebody, because there's probably no one thing fits every home. So we went in there with some defensible space projects, and then set those up as demonstration areas so the rest of the community could go in and look. And then we also used some of the concept I talk about with the shaded fuel break, and looked at some riparian areas within the community. Shaded fuel breaks along those riparian areas to break the community up. That community is about 1,500 acres in size and has just as much wildland inside of it as it does outside of it. And so to break the community up with the riparian areas and the shaded fuel breaks, as well as some of the road systems, to build more of a pre-attack plan. How can we compartmentalize fire if it started within the community? So from that, they took those, and those are some that we would provide assistance with. They also worked within their own funding to hire contractors to do some of their own work, basically come up with a mitigation strategy, and then they also would take that and use it for part of their Firewise status. And then, I think all that led to is, I think the 4th time that subdivision went bankrupt, but this previous time, then they named their subdivision after the refuge, and I like to think that was all because of some of the Firewise stuff done there. And then we take that same approach to the other communities, but it all starts with conversation.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an acre cost
Okay,
I wanted to ask Kip if you had a per acre cost for your goat.
we do.
Agreement.
And it kind of depends on the amount of acres, and it depends on the location. For the goat herder that we're working off an IDIQ contract. And so for down at the Stone Lakes Refuge, so it takes that goat herder a little bit more effort to put the goats down there. We're looking at anything down there of above, I believe, 40 acres. We start to drop the cost. It's about $450 to $475 per acre. Anything less than that tends to be a little higher cost, so about $500 an acre. And then also down in the Sacramento River Refuge, because it's closer to where that goat herder works from, it's closer to the $350 to $375 per acre range. And that's all lined up on a cost per year. That cost tends to increase every year, but it's all kind of written into that IDIQ contract.
Okay, with that, I'll ask the panel just to provide your thoughts if there's anything from a recommendation standpoint as we move forward into the future within the service, dealing with the challenges in the urban interface. So what's one thing that the audience should take away? Start with you, Glenn.
I guess the biggest thing, looking at budgets and how everything is going is priorities. We just got to get our priorities set, and that's just where we're going. So.
Yeah, I agree. Thinking, more universally at how we're going to fund these projects, as well as fund our habitat management needs, and just to to understand it's not just one way is going to win. There's a lot of complexity out there in what we're doing, and just try to integrate everything, all the programs, and come up with the right direction.
Okay.
I think one thing to keep in mind, look at the past. Uniformitarianism means the past is the key to the present. Take that and extrapolate to the future. Try not to do 100 things and get some of them right, and leave the rest on the table. Do 10 things and do 10 things right and do them well. I think that's what to look forward to. Kip.
Now that I feel a little less nervous sitting down, some of my thoughts are coming in. Probably one of the things that I'd like to leave you with is thinking about being flexible and thinking outside the box. These are interesting times that we're all living in when it comes to habitat management, to conservation in general, climate change, declining budgets, all these different things. I think that as fire managers, it's critical for us to work with our land managers, our refuge biologists, and really come to some great ideas, thinking outside the box. And I think I've mentioned before, that's the way we've always done it. It needs to be replaced with, hey, let's give that a try. We always throw out these really cool terms like adaptive management. This is the time when we really need to start thinking about adaptive management. Looking at how climate change is impacting us and impacting our habitats. Maybe fire has been something that we haven't used in the past. Maybe that's a tool that we really, really need to look hard at utilizing as opposed to not. Or just the opposite. Maybe with climate change, maybe we've used fire in some places. Maybe we need to look at some of these other alternatives, whether it be goats, chemical, mechanical, some of these different things. So one thing I want to leave you with is think flexible, think outside the box. These are challenging times, and they're going to take extraordinary measures, and people really thinking outside their comfort zone.
Thank you. So just to tag on to Kip's final comment, and I don't think I could say it better than Kip. Much of this conference, we will be talking about the challenges that we have been facing and those that we will be facing in the future. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree that they are numerous and daunting. However, the way we've solved problems in the past, in many cases, is not the way we're going to solve those problems in the future. So again, as Kip mentioned on that out-of-the-box thinking, we can find a million ways to tell us why we cannot do things. But the resource that we are stewards of, that it is our task to figure out a way to do things. I think some of the illustrations that these gentlemen sitting before you have shown several of those things, those challenges that many folks would say, oh, it's just easier or better to say no and we're not going to do them. But again, with some of the examples they've provided around Cape Canaveral, the politics and the urban interface there, the ability to manage golden sheep warbler habitat and meet all of the other objectives of Balcones, the challenges of the urban interface in Minnesota Valley is huge. So again, the answer is not no, it is just we need to figure out a way to make it happen. So on behalf of the panel, we thank you all for attending. We will be around all week. Feel free to visit with us, and we'll stick around to answer any questions on the side after the presentation as well. So again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.